No, not now. Damn it. The shout of Edward Ryden, CEO of Ryden Corp, thundered through the 47th floor, the executive headquarters of one of the most powerful corporations in Chicago. Just a few floors below, staff were scattering like ants from a broken nest. But inside the luxurious glass-walled office, only one thing echoed: panic. The official interpreter, the only person recognized by the Japanese side, had just called to cancel due to a family emergency. There was no backup plan. No one else had the authority to sit at the negotiating table. And there were only 15 minutes left. The meeting with the Japanese tech delegation, representing a $200 million partnership deal, was on its way. Without a translator, the collapse of the agreement was inevitable. Edward tightened his Italian tie, eyes fixed on the lobby doors, where 3 black Lexus cars were pulling in. 20 years of building Ryden Corp, about to fall apart over the inability to understand a single language. In the world of high-level diplomacy, one misplaced punctuation mark can cost a nation. And the Japanese, known for their formality and pride, would never sit down if they sensed disrespect. The room froze. No one could speak. Every emergency option had failed, until a small voice rose from the corner of the room, soft as breath, yet strong enough to alter fate. I can speak Japanese. Everyone turned. A woman in a janitor's uniform stood beneath the reflection of polished glass lights. In her hand was a whiteboard cloth, but in her eyes was the language the entire room was desperately searching for. I can speak Japanese. A quiet sentence, yet it landed like a slap in the stifling air that choked the boardroom. Everyone turned to look at the speaker. Leona Miles, 29 years old, wearing the navy blue uniform of the cleaning staff. She stood there silently, still holding a chalk-dusted whiteboard cloth. No makeup. Hair neatly tied back at the nape of her neck. A person everyone had grown used to, not seeing. For a moment, the room was so silent, the ticking of the clock felt deafening. Then, soft chuckles began to surface. God, don't tell me it's from anime, a finance director muttered sarcastically. Maybe she learned it from Google Translate. But the sharpest laugh came from Victoria Lang, the Director of External Affairs, the second most powerful woman at Ryden Corp after the CEO. She folded her arms, leaning back in her chair, as if watching a comedy show. A floor cleaner wants to interpret for the Japanese delegation? Are you planning to make them laugh or walk out? Leona didn't flinch. She just stood there, eyes unblinking, staring straight at Victoria, as if those kinds of cuts were nothing new to her. And in her gaze was something that could not be dismissed. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes sharp as razors. She scanned Leona from head to toe, as if spotting a stain on the marble floor would have been more tolerable than the woman standing in front of her. Her voice rang out, sweet but venomous. Where did you study? Graduated from YouTube University? Or did you learn Japanese through anime and instant ramen? The entire room burst into laughter. A few male executives covered their mouths, trying to appear polite, but failing to hide their contempt. A maid wants to save $200 million, someone whispered. Leona didn't answer. She slowly lifted her head, her dark eyes as deep as a Chicago winter night. Then she spoke. Dabian guangrong desu. Misama ni owai dekite, kiru yori kansha monshi agemasu. Her voice rang clear, precise, confident, every syllable perfectly enunciated. That language wasn't memorized. It wasn't from an app. It was a living language, absorbed through knowledge and through the silence of years spent being overlooked. Edward froze. He didn't speak Japanese, but he could feel the fluency, the presence, the impeccable respect in every sound. "What did you just say?" he asked slowly. Leona replied in English softly. "It is a great honor to meet you all. I sincerely thank you for this opportunity." A formal greeting, in traditional Japanese business etiquette. Silence spread like a tsunami. And Victoria? She stood frozen. In her eyes, for the first time, appeared a flicker of doubt and fear. While the entire room was still stunned by the power and precision of Leona's Japanese, Edward stood speechless. For the first time in 3 years, he truly saw her. No longer the woman who quietly pushed a cleaning cart at the end of the day, nodded politely, then vanished behind the hum of a vacuum. No longer the invisible one, whose name existed only on the temp staff roster. Leona Miles had once been a top student in East Asian Studies at Cornell University, one of the most prestigious schools in America. She had been selected for a student exchange program in Kyoto. She had once been the pride of her department, until life turned cruel. Her mother, Marlene, was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. Her younger brother, only 12 at the time, couldn't even tell insulin from paracetamol. Leona dropped out, folded up every dream into a suitcase, left behind her elite dorm room, and stepped into cleaning shifts from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. She didn't learn Japanese to decorate a resume. She learned it because it was a genuine passion. A passion that had been tucked away, silenced, gathering dust, day after day in boardrooms where she was never allowed to speak, until today. She spoke, and the whole world had no choice but to listen. Edward Ryden stepped closer to Leona. His eyes no longer held the look of a CEO gazing at a janitor, but of a man realizing he might have overlooked a diamond hidden in dust. "You have 20 minutes, Edward said slowly, as if placing his entire reputation on the line. "Get changed. Meet me in the boardroom." That sentence felt like a door opening, but there was no red carpet, no welcoming light, only suffocating pressure, and dozens of skeptical eyes waiting for her to stumble. Leona left the room, heart pounding in her chest. The receptionist looked at her, confused, seeing that fierce determination in her eyes. Without a word, Leona pointed to the spare wardrobe and said, "I need to borrow a set." Black. Simple. The old suit, once kept for VIP guests, now draped over her like a silent declaration that needed no explanation. On the way to the boardroom, Leona untied her hair and swept her curls into a low bun. Neat. Elegant. The hallway lights reflected in her eyes, no longer lowered, no longer hiding, but glowing like those of a warrior, ready to step into the light. As Leona adjusted the button on her jacket out in the hallway, inside the boardroom, a quiet plan was being woven through whispers and venomous glances. Victoria Lang, Rydencorp's Director of External Affairs, stood by the window, a cup of expensive coffee in hand, her lips curling slightly as she watched Edward preparing the negotiation table. She tilted her head toward Jason Cray, the Deputy Director of Operations, and whispered, "If that girl pulls this off, I swear she'll never set foot in here again. She has no idea who she just messed with." Jason frowned but said nothing. Everyone knew Victoria was the real shadow power at Rydencorp, the woman who had removed no fewer than 5 senior executives with nothing more than a single internal email. 3 years ago, it was Victoria who had blocked Leona's reinstatement scholarship file from reaching the HR department. The walking broomstick, she once called her, referring to Leona. To her, a person who cleaned boardrooms had no right to dream of sitting in one. And now, that broomstick was about to sit next to the CEO, across from an international delegation. Victoria gripped her coffee cup so tightly the lid began to buckle. What she hated most wasn't incompetence. It was someone like Leona, someone with real talent, who refused to bow. The glass doors of the boardroom slid open. Leona stepped in, no longer the janitor in a faded uniform, but a composed woman, walking with quiet confidence in a simple yet elegant black suit. All eyes turned toward her. A few eyebrows lifted. A few whispers swept across the room. But Leona didn't flinch. She bowed respectfully, then walked straight to the negotiation table. Mr. Takeda, the head of the Japanese delegation, a salt and pepper-haired man in a modern kimono, turned to Edward, waiting for an introduction. Edward smiled, his voice deep but steady. "Allow me to introduce Ms. Leona Miles, our cultural advisor and interpreter for this collaboration." Leona bowed in traditional form, then began to speak in Japanese. Each word was clear, graceful, and full of presence. "It is an honor to welcome you. We hope today's meeting will mark the beginning of a prosperous and long-lasting partnership." A flicker of surprise crossed Mr. Takeda's face. Then he bowed, deeper than usual, a rare sign of genuine respect. "You understand our culture better than many of my own advisors in Tokyo." In that moment, the entire room seemed to shift. Leona, once overlooked, was now the center of attention for an international delegation, hanging on her every word. At the far end of the table, Victoria clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. There was no laughter now, only darkened eyes, and a silent fury brewing beneath the surface. Inside the ice-cold, air-conditioned boardroom, where the meeting was underway, another battle was quietly erupting backstage, through secret calls, subtle nods, and prices silently agreed upon. Sasha Bennett, Leona's closest friend at Rydencorp, the one who had once shared lunchboxes and unfinished dreams with her, was now standing inside the record storage room. Pale yellow light cast a hesitant glow across her conflicted face. In Sasha's hands was a printed copy of an old disciplinary for covering an emergency shift for a colleague without formal approval. A minor issue, but just enough to be twisted into a question of professional ethics. Victoria had known Sasha's weakness for a long time. Her mother had heart disease. Medical debt was piling up. One discreet bank transfer and a promise to help Sasha transfer to the PR department was all it took. "She has a prior disciplinary mark," Sasha whispered, voice trembling but still pressing send. "And maybe she's not as honest as people think." That message was swiftly and strategically forwarded by Victoria to the tech leadership group, disguised as an internal caution. A calculated seed of doubt, planted just as Leona was delivering a historic performance in the boardroom. Betrayal always comes from where you least expect it. The meeting was going surprisingly well. Leona wasn't just translating, she was orchestrating the atmosphere. She explained context, lightened the mood with gentle humor, and tactfully avoided details that could lead to cultural misunderstandings. The Japanese delegation nodded in satisfaction. Edward let out a quiet breath of relief. And that's when Victoria made her move. She stood up, flashing a graceful smile as if about to tell a heartwarming story. "Ah, perhaps we should share something interesting. Isn't it inspiring to see someone who used to hold a mop here, now sitting at the negotiation table?" The room seemed to freeze, like someone had just muted all sound. Leona turned her head slightly. Edward froze. "Is that true?" Mr. Takeda asked slowly, his voice laced with surprise, eyes locked on Edward. In Japanese culture, social status and personal dignity are paramount. A lack of transparency about Leona's background could be perceived as a subtle form of disrespect. Leona swallowed hard. Victoria sat back down, satisfied, legs crossed with poise. At Riedenkorp, we've always supported diverse backgrounds. No one laughed. No one spoke. The air turned cold as steel. That seemingly light-hearted remark had struck deep at the dignity of a woman who had once held her family together, with hands that scrubbed floors. The meeting ended without applause, without toasts, without even a polite smile. Mr. Takeda stood up, offering only a slight nod in place of a farewell. We will consider further before making a final decision. A courteous phrase, but everyone understood. Things had gone off track. Edward said nothing. His lips were pressed tightly together. The room felt drained of all air. Only the echo of the Japanese delegation's footsteps filled the awkward silence. Leona bowed as she saw them out, still holding a composed, professional demeanor. But deep inside, a fresh wound had been carved, not from the insult itself, but from the place where it came. The very place that had once been her dream. Behind her, Victoria leisurely organized her documents, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. That's the price of letting a janitor play diplomat. A fitting end to a cheap little joke. No one responded. Leona stepped out of the boardroom, her posture steady, but her silence that of a warrior who had just lost the first battle. But what Victoria couldn't see was that in her eyes there was no fear, only the silence of a storm forming. That night, back in her small apartment on the south side, Leona sat silently in the cramped kitchen. On the table, a bowl of cold noodles and a medical bill note her mother had just sent from the nursing center. She picked up her phone, intending to text her younger brother, when a new message popped up. A single line, written in Japanese, simple but heavy with meaning. "May I meet you privately? Takeda." She didn't respond right away. She read it 3 times, then smiled. Just barely. The next morning, Leona arrived at Hanami Tea Room, a quiet, traditional tea house tucked away in Chicago's old Japanese district. Mr. Takeda was already waiting, seated beside a young woman dressed with quiet elegance. Asuka Mori, his senior assistant. The conversation began with lotus tea and ended with an offer Leona had never dared to imagine. "We need someone like you for our Tokyo, North America office," he said. "It's not just about language. You understand cultural rhythm, and you kept your dignity even when insulted. That is the spirit of an advisor." Leona sat still, heart filled with a tangle of emotions. A door was opening, not from Riedenkorp, but from an entirely different world, one that was wider, truer, and worthy of the values she carried inside. That night, in a dark room, lit only by the faint glow of her laptop screen, Leona opened a folder titled Language Protocols. No one knew, but for the past 2 years, during late-night shifts after everyone had gone home, she had been quietly collecting, observing, and documenting, not for revenge, but for preparation, because she knew a voice. One day, the folder contained 72 files, neatly organized by topic. Internal reports altered by Victoria, inflated profits, hidden deficits, emails revealing how she intentionally excluded 3 Black-owned companies, citing brand image misalignment. Internal messages where Victoria referred to an African candidate as too urban and criticized an Indian employee as unappealing on the brochure. And most damning of all, proof that Victoria had signed off on a staff training reimbursement that was actually a payoff to Sasha in exchange for digging up dirt on Leona's past. Leona sat in silence, eyes fixed on the screen. Every line of data was once a cut to the soul, but now they were weapons. No one had ever suspected that the woman they saw as the silent shadow was the one holding the secrets powerful enough to bring down an empire of deceit. 8 a.m., Monday. The executive boardroom on the 47th floor, the very place that once denied her existence, was now packed with Rydencorp's most powerful figures. The air was heavy. Mr. Takeda had just submitted an official report to the board, alleging a lack of transparency in the bidding process and systemic discrimination within the company. An emergency meeting was called, and right then, the glass doors opened. Leona stepped in, not in a janitor's uniform, no knocking, no bowing. In her hand, a laptop and a matte black briefcase. Her eyes swept across the room, one face at a time, then landed squarely on Victoria. Victoria leaned back, smirking. "Oh, it's you again? Still haven't learned when to walk away?" Leona placed the briefcase on the table, plugged a USB drive into the projector. Her voice was calm, steady, not loud, not soft. "No, I haven't walked away. I'm here because Mr. Takeda requested a witness, and because this board deserves to know the whole truth." She looked Victoria straight in the eye and said, with quiet resolve, "I'm not your enemy. I'm your ending." The air froze. The shareholders held their breath. The real battle had just begun. Leona pressed enter. The large screen at the head of the boardroom lit up, and a series of documents appeared one by one, unredacted, unfiltered, no names hidden, no escape routes left. First email, Victoria to the head of recruitment. Avoid candidates with overly ethnic names. Doesn't fit Rydencorp's image. Second email. Regarding a black-owned company, Victoria had scribbled in the margin, "They don't project elite status. Could damage the brand." Edward said nothing. His face was slowly draining of color. Board member Mr. Patel covered his mouth with one hand. Leona remained composed. She opened an audio file. Victoria's voice, cold and unmistakable. "I don't want people of color sitting in strategic meetings. It doesn't look professional." One more click. A blurry clip from a dead-angle camera inside the women's restroom. Sasha, holding an envelope, eyes wide with panic, stuffing it quickly into her blazer pocket. Across from her, Victoria, leaning in and whispering, "You do your part. I'll take care of the rest." No one in the room could speak. 1 second, 2, 3. The silence was more devastating than any explosion. Victoria, the woman who once ruled the company with a single glance, now sat frozen, pale, gripping the chair armrest with trembling fingers. And Leona? She wasn't smug. She didn't gloat. She simply looked straight toward justice and pushed it forward. When the final clip ended, no one spoke. Only the sound of Victoria's heavy breathing and the uncomfortable shifting of board members filled the room. Edward stood. His face was pale, but his voice rang out, clear and thunderous. "Victoria Lang, you are terminated immediately for discrimination, abuse of power, financial manipulation, and violation of corporate ethics. Your file has been forwarded to the U.S. Department of Justice." Victoria shot to her feet, her voice trembling. "This is a witch hunt, a setup. She's just some bitter little girl." "She," Edward cut in, "is the only person in this room who kept her conscience intact. Security, escort her out." Victoria turned to Leona, her eyes blazing with hatred. But no one cared anymore. She was escorted out of the very chamber of power she once ruled with cold dominance. Now just a disgraced figure, drowning in her own sins. In the corner, Sasha collapsed into her seat, tears streaming down her face. "Leona, I didn't know it would go this far. I just needed money for my mother's treatment." Leona looked at her. not with hatred, but with emptiness. Forgiveness, she said, is not for those who sell their soul just to survive one more day. Then she turned away, never looking back. Because justice doesn't cry. It stands up, and it keeps walking. June. The city of Chicago shimmered under the summer sun. A place Leona once entered only to empty trash bins now stood the private office of the Regional Director of Asian Strategy, Leona Miles. A glass-walled room overlooking Lake Michigan. On her desk, 3 laptops glowed: Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, the 3 new markets where Leona had just successfully negotiated representative offices. In just 6 months, Asian market revenue had doubled. Leona was invited to join the official executive board, earning $350,000 per year, not including equity from the expansion projects. But she didn't use that money to flaunt success. Instead, she created the Second Voice Scholarship Fund for students who had to drop out to care for family, just as she once did. A dream deferred is not a dream dead, Leona said at the scholarship's launch at Cornell University. I don't want anyone to have to choose between caring for their mother and earning a degree, the way I once had to. A photo of her standing at the podium, dressed in a deep navy suit with the words, "From silent to strategic" behind her, was shared over 4 million times in 48 hours. Leona was no longer the woman who used to mop the floors. She was now a living symbol of resilience, dignity, and the power to rewrite prejudice. The December cover of Forbes magazine featured a woman standing in a snow-covered Chicago cityscape. Gray coat, hands in her pockets, eyes steady and unshaken. The bold italicized headline read, "Leona Miles, the woman once forgotten, now redefining power in silence." The 3-page interview detailed her journey, from a basement janitor's closet to the executive boardroom. But what moved millions of readers wasn't the revenue figures. It was her own words. "I don't fight back with fire. I use light. The light of truth, of patience, of the self-respect they tried to take from me." When asked why she didn't sue Victoria or make everything louder and more public, Leona simply smiled. When people think you're invisible, they don't realize you've been quietly watching everything. Silence isn't weakness. It's how I observe and wait for the right moment. At the end of the interview, she paused, looked directly into the camera, and said, "Don't rise just because you've been hurt. Rise, so others won't have to be hurt the same way." That line spread across social media like a spark of hope, and the story of Leona, once a name no one noticed, had now become a voice that changed an entire system.